During the Paris Peace Conferences, there were 4 major players. These were America, led by Woodrow Wilson; France, led by Georges Clermont; Britain, led by David Lloyd George; and Italy, that was led by Vittorio Orlando. These people were named the Big Four. These guys had the most influence at the Paris Peace Conferences because they were the biggest countries. Smaller countries like Australia were called dominions because they were the colonies of Britain. At the peace conferences, what would often happen would be that the Big Four would meet. They would determine the conditions that they were going to put into the Treaty of Versailles, and then they would go and visit with the smaller countries and tell them that was what was going to happen. So, if we first of all look at Georges Clermont, France had been invaded by Germany. The majority of the destruction that occurred in Germany during World War I was in France by the Germans. As a direct result, Georges Clermont wanted Germany to pay. They wanted a guarantee that Germany would never invade France again, and they wanted severe reparations to make sure that they could rebuild France to re-establish it as the country that it had been. David Lloyd George, on the other hand, was from Britain. While they lost a lot of lives, Britain wasn't actually invaded during World War I. There was a little bit of damage along the coastlines due to Zeppelin attacks. However, ultimately, they didn't suffer anywhere near as much physically as what France did. David Lloyd George was really concerned about punishing Germany too much because he believed that there was the threat of communism coming from Russia. He thought that if the Germans were squeezed until the pips squeak, as some people were calling for, that eventually Germany would fall to communism and it would spread throughout Europe. He also thought that if the reparation repayments were too harsh on Germany, another war would break out within 25 years. He was right. Vittorio Orlando was the Italian Prime Minister. Italy had joined the side of the Allies in 1915, and the majority of the fighting by Italians was along the Italian border up near Austria-Hungary. Because of this, the other members of the Big Four didn't really see Orlando as an important player within the Paris Peace Conferences, and often Orlando was left out of the conversations between the other 3 players. During the peace conferences, Orlando decided that he would return to Italy and leave the conference altogether. He did return to sign the treaty, but as a result, Italy didn't receive anywhere near the reparations that the Italian people believed that they deserved. The final player of the Big Four during the Paris Peace Conferences was Woodrow Wilson. Wilson was the American Prime Minister, and when Germany sued for peace, so when Germany asked for peace, they asked her on behalf of Woodrow's 14 points, or Wilson's 14 points. In early 1918, Wilson had published 14 points for peace. These included things like freedom of the seas, freedom of association, freedom from alliances. Germany, when they asked for peace in October and November 1918, said we'd only sign a peace treaty if these were what the peace treaty were based on. At the end of the day, however, Wilson's 14 points were reduced to 3 in the peace treaty, of which the freedom of the seas was probably the most obvious one that still remained. Because of this, the USA refused to sign the Paris Peace Conference documents. They refused to sign the Treaty of Versailles and any of the treaties that existed after that. They withdrew from European affairs and started a policy of isolationism where they stopped being involved in Europe. They weren't members of the League of Nations, and because of this, the League of Nations really lost some of its bite throughout the world.